Move to questions without notice. Give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, 130 hostages still remain in tunnels after the October 7 attacks by Hamas on Israel last year, in which 1,200 people were massacred, and violent anti-Semitism is on the rise here in Australia and indeed around the world. Why did the Prime Minister make a captain's call to back Palestine's bid for full United Nations membership, breaching faith with our Jewish community and decades of bipartisanship and putting us at odds with allies including the United States, the United Kingdom and Canada?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. And of course this House, with the support of the Labor Party, the government members as well as the members of the Coalition, passed a resolution expressing our unequivocal outrage at the events and horror of the terrorist act on October 7. We continue to call for Hamas to release hostages. We continue to express our concern at the loss of life, every life that is innocent, whether that be an innocent Israeli life or an innocent Palestinian life. Contrary to the Leader of the Opposition's depiction of this, the Australian government has had a long-term position of support for a two-state solution. And in this, I accept responsibility for government decisions as Prime Minister. We had a proper process to make that decision through all of our appropriate channels. The resolution that was carried by the United Nations called for support for a two-state solution based upon the 1967 boundaries. That is something that is supported by the Australian Labor Party and has historically been supported by those opposite as well. The people who do not support a two-state solution include Hamas and have included at times, there are some members of the current Israeli government who make it clear their opposition to that as well. We, in supporting that resolution, when we saw the wording, I believe that it's consistent with providing a pathway to peace that is so necessary as we go forward. The people who are vehemently opposed to that resolution, include Hamas, include people who have a view that there should be just a single state from the river to the sea, as the chant goes. That is not my position. That is not the government's position. And it also wasn't the position of Japan, Korea, the New Zealand Conservative government led by Christopher Luxon, ASEAN, of all of those countries who all overwhelmingly voted for that motion.
Concluded. The call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government helping to ease cost of living pressures, including in the budget?
Order. Members on my
How
left.
does this reflect the priorities of the Albanese Labor government, and what are some of the ways that all Australians will feel the benefits?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Dunkley for asking a question about the economy on Budget Day. And indeed, tonight there will be two big themes of the budget that will be brought down by the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. The first is helping people with their cost of living and doing it in a way that doesn't put pressure on inflation. And the second is how we build a better future by investing in a future made right here in Australia. So tonight's budget will deliver for all Australians, not just some. It will deliver a tax cut for all 13.6 million Australians. It will deliver stronger Medicare in every community, including an increased rollout of our urgent care clinics. It will deliver more homes in every part of the community. We now have $32 billion of support for housing in this country. Unlike what those opposite did, was to sit back and think that it could all be just done if they just forgot about it. If they just forgot about it.
For
And that's
Deakin
in
will
spite
cease interjecting.
of them holding up measures, including the Help to Buy scheme that remains in the Senate. It will deliver a better deal for every working parent. More help for households doing it tough. What we have seen, unlike those opposite who had wage reductions in real terms as a key feature of their economic architecture, we are seeing real wages increase in this country. We have seen productivity increase for 3 quarters in a row. We are seeing more jobs created under this government than any new government in Australia's history. We are seeing the gender pay gap at record lows. We are seeing a government that is moderating inflation, bringing it down to a lower figure than what was predicted in my EFO just in December last year. Half of what we inherited from those opposite. At the same time as we're dealing with those immediate pressures, we are shaping the future, creating new, secure, well-paid jobs by working to facilitate private sector investment in the future economy.
Order.
Those opposite denied the future and just thought they could just occupy the space. We are shaping the future in order to make sure that we create jobs and look after prosperity.
The members for Barker, Casey and Deakin interjected continually during that answer. They will cease interjecting or they shall be warned. The call goes to the honourable member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In November 2023, Royal Australian Navy divers were injured by sonar pulses fired at them by a Chinese Navy destroyer. 10 days ago, a Chinese fighter jet fired flares in the flight path of an RAN Seahawk, risking the lives of our people. Why hasn't the Prime Minister called President Xi about these clear acts of intimidation?
Order. The call to the Prime Minister.
Why doesn't the opposition back up Australia? Why do they look for political differentiation when this is about our national interests?
Order. Members on my left.
This mob who never had a phone call,
Hinkler.
let alone a meeting, during their entire last term in office. Nothing. This mob who are happy to have President Xi speak in this parliament but had no conversations with them the entire time. We have made it very clear that the actions of the PLA are unprofessional and unacceptable. And I would have thought that that was not a hard ask for you to say, yes, we agree we are at one. We are at one in defending the Australian Defence Force, rather than trying to send confusing messages to the People's Republic of China. I would have thought it wasn't a hard ask.
Member for Bowman.
We have made all of the appropriate representations. We continue to say we will agree and cooperate with China where we can. We will disagree where we must, and on this we must, and on this we have.
The Prime Minister will pause. Member for Blair will order. The Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister order. The Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister will cease interjecting. Order. The member for Blair will resume his seat. The Minister for Home Affairs will cease interjecting and refer to members by their correct titles. Prime Minister in continuation.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I note the anger on behalf of China. What we are doing...
The Prime Minister hasn't concluded his answer, so he shall just pause. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order will hear that.
Well, it's on relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was, why hasn't the Prime Minister shown strength of character to call the Chinese president? Why can't you stand up for our country?
Resume your seats. Order. The member for Groom. Order. The Leader of the Opposition has raised his point of order, which he's entitled to do. The Leader of the House is able to also respond on the point of order.
Yeah, Mr Speaker, just on the point of order, we at the end of that had a complete abuse. The anger gets the better of the Leader of the Opposition. He just abuses it every time.
Order. Order. First day, new session. Same rules apply. Everyone can make a point of order on relevance. They shall not add extra material or extra comments or extra grabs at the end of the points of order. The Prime Minister is talking about the issue. He is giving information to the House about the incident. Order. The Leader of the Opposition has raised the point of order. The Prime Minister is being directly relevant under the standing orders. He has the call.
Yep. The senior members of the government received through all of the appropriate bodies briefings. We made clear our position, both privately and publicly and unequivocally, our opposition to what occurred. And I would have thought that there are times when an opposition leader has the strength to say, I'm with the Australian government on this. And what is weak is trying to look for political differentiation where this is an issue where you are either on the Australian government side and on the side of the Australian Defence Force and its personnel, or you are questioning that and therefore undermining the government's position in relation to the representations we have made to China.
Order.
The ADF were in international waters, responding in international air, providing support for an international action against North Korea. I would have thought that it wouldn't be beyond the opposition to say
Prime Minister's
we
time
agree
has
with the
concluded.
government.
When the House comes to order, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition will also cease interjecting. The call goes to the member for Blair.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. What steps are the Albanese Labor government taking to rebuild Australian manufacturing? What are the barriers to the government's Future Made in Australia plan?
The call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Blair, not just for the question but for being a big backer of Australian manufacturing. Creating secure, well-paid jobs doesn't just happen by accident. It requires learning the lessons of history, taking absolute unequivocal ambition for the future, takes strong leadership with a vision for what the country can look like, governments that work for all Australians. We have a big job to do in making the transition to net zero. We're playing catch-up after 10 wasted years under the coalition. We need to urgently mobilise manufacturing to make things here to get us to net zero. And in doing so, we can cut emissions and grow blue-collar jobs. That's what a future made in Australia is all about, and it's at the heart of tonight's budget. Instead of shipping off our ideas to another country and importing their products, we can seize new ideas and create great jobs. From groundbreaking new solar technology not made anywhere else on the planet, like what SunDrive reckons it can do in the Hunter. From hydrogen electrolyser manufacturing by Fortescue in Gladstone, through to Hysata's work in the Illawarra, hydrogen production crucial in manufacturing green metals, keeping steel manufacturing here in the country, from processing critical minerals and turning them into Aussie-made batteries like those made by Gelion in Sydney's west. So solar, hydrogen, green metals, critical minerals, batteries. We have the people and the know-how and the manufacturing muscle to get it done in Australia. And as I said earlier, time and again, we've seen world-leading Australian know-how go offshore. We have know-how that's created jobs and opportunities and competitive edge for other countries. But this government said enough is enough. Enough of the failed policies of the coalition, who sent our car makers packing. Enough of the nasty negativity that poured scorn on manufacturers and cold water on their job creation. And for all those years, all we've had from those opposite, constant negativity, no plan, at every opportunity opposing a chance to back Australian manufacturing. No to tax cuts that would have helped manufacturing workers. No to the National Reconstruction Fund. No to energy price relief that would have helped Australian manufacturing. Tonight's budget will be a budget for every Australian, and it will show the difference between a government with a plan and those in opposition who oppose everything. We will invest responsibly in Australia's manufacturing future, as opposed to an opposition that mocks manufacturing and calls it a graveyard.
Give the call to the honourable member for Warringah.
When 2 young men died, New South Wales government introduced mandatory sentences for one-punch attacks. When it was terrorism, laws were changed to jail people on the apprehended risk of crimes. But when Australian men kill Australian women, the government's national plan is to take 10 years. In the gallery today are advocates here to hold a vigil for the 192 women killed by men since the 2021 March for Justice. We have a crisis of male violence and women's safety. Will you be tough on this domestic terrorism by leading an overhaul of national sentencing laws, including AVOs?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Warringah for her question and for raising these issues with me when I visited her electorate of Warringah recently as well. Violence against women is indeed a national crisis. We know that when, on average, once every 4 days, a woman is murdered by someone they know, by an intimate partner or former partner, that is a national crisis. It's a scourge and it's a stain on our nation, and we need to do better. Governments need to do better, but we as a community need to do better as well, because this is about more than just government action. This is about our whole society and how it functions, and about respect for women. We can change it, and we must change it. Our record investment in the national plan, I do disagree with her depiction of the national plan. The national plan from 2022 is a recognition that, tragically, you can't solve this overnight. You need to change behaviour across a whole range of ways. We need to change the way the education system works. The Royal Commission in Victoria in 2016, one of the things that they found was that they needed to get that education about respectful relationships in school, and that has happened. And one of the things about the National Cabinet meeting I convened was that people talked about replicating best practice, and that included the issue of sentencing. And I note that New South Wales has made a significant announcement, and I support it. The stronger action for people who have AVOs, stronger action to make sure that people aren't just released into the community who are a threat to a woman. Very strong action indeed, and I know that other states, premiers and chief ministers as well, agreed at that meeting to look at all of their laws, including bail laws, and to return to the National Cabinet. They are state laws, they're not national laws, but we can encourage best practice when it comes to that. We, through that National Cabinet meeting, established permanently the Leaving Violence payment, and tonight's budget will see $925 million for that. Tonight's budget will also see $1 billion directed towards crisis and transitional accommodation for women and children escaping domestic violence. In addition to that, the Minister for Communications is doing important work to tackle extreme online misogyny, which is a real issue and something that will be a real focus as well. I pay tribute to the survivors and people who are working so strongly on this. A focus on prevention, of course, must mean a focus on perpetrators as well. We know the work will be hard. There are no overnight solutions, but we're absolutely committed to working, including with the member for Warringah and across this parliament, on all of these issues to make sure that the scourge which is there be dealt with in the best possible way.
Before I call the member for Higgins, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is the Australian Political Exchange Council's 15th delegation from New Zealand. And also in the gallery today is Mr Paul Evans, together with his wife Megan. Paul Evans contributed to the construction of Parliament House. On behalf of the Parliament, welcome to you all. I give the call to the honourable member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government leading action to address the national crisis of family, domestic and sexual violence?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Higgins for the question. Of course, family and domestic violence destroys lives and is absolutely unacceptable in a country like Australia. Safety of women and children experiencing family, domestic and sexual violence has been and is a priority for our government. That is why the Prime Minister convened a dedicated National Cabinet this month, where all governments committed to build on efforts under the National Plan to end violence against women and children. Now, this plan was developed in partnership with victim survivors and put victim survivors at its heart. The National Cabinet was clear that all governments will strengthen their efforts to address violence against women and the conditions that enable and promote it. Now, following National Cabinet, the Albanese Labor government announced we will establish the Permanent Leaving Violence program to replace the current trials underway. Victim survivors will now have the certainty of knowing a safety net will be there should they need it, where they can access up to $5,000 in financial support, safety planning, risk assessment and referral pathways for support. Importantly, the payment will also be indexed annually to ensure it maintains its current value and complements other financial support like crisis payment. The Leaving Violence program builds on the improvements we have made to the escaping violence payment since we came to government. It became clear in the trial that the trial had not been resourced appropriately to allow for the necessary safety planning and referral support needed by many clients who actually had never engaged with specialist services before. Now, this investment that we've made complements numerous other investments we've made under the National Plan, with more than $3 billion of investment now in women's safety, which not only responds to the needs of women and children experiencing violence, but also critically supports the work of preventing violence, intervening before it escalates, and the recovery of victim survivors. Our government, of course, legislated 10 days of paid family domestic violence leave for all employees. We've boosted funding to frontline services, which includes restoring the funding which was due to cease under the former government in June last year. We've delivered more safe places for women and children experiencing family and domestic violence, which will assist more than 2,800 women and children each year, and there will be an additional 720 new places available under the next round. We are putting the focus on perpetrators by developing a national risk assessment framework for service providers to manage the risk posed by perpetrators, as well as trialling new perpetrator interventions in partnership with states and territories. These are just some of the actions our government is taking. We know there's more to do, and we all need to work together, government, civil society, businesses, organisations.
Call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Australians are poorer than they were 2 years ago. The cash rate, which this dismal Prime Minister couldn't even name during the campaign, has gone from 0.35% to 4.35%. Real disposable incomes have fallen, soaring energy prices are hurting families, and businesses are being crippled by huge cost increases. Why are Australians paying the price for the weak economic leadership of this Prime Minister?
Before the Prime Minister answers, I just want to remind all members about the importance of language being used during questions and answers. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question, and she gets a bonus point for asking a question about the economy on budget day, so I'll give that. But the truth is that the member opposite raises a range of issues. One is inflation and interest rates. Now, inflation was twice what it was, what it is now, when they were in office. Inflation peaked at 2.1% in the March 2022 quarter, in just a quarter, whereas now inflation is at 3.6% on an annual basis, which is lower than the 3.75%, which is what was predicted in my EFO. You would think that when inflation was peaking, what there should be is a responsible budget. But instead, we got dollars flowing out everywhere. That ended the big cash splash in the lead up to the May 2022 election. That made things worse.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The member for Groom knows he's on a warning, so that means in future write down "I'm on a warning" so you don't forget. So the member for Groom can leave the chamber. So if you're on a warning, chances are, if you interject, you're not going to be here. Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you. The unemployment rate, of course, is lower than it was under those opposite. Employment is higher. The participation rate is higher. The gender pay gap is lower. There are more women employed full-time. There are more manufacturing jobs. There are less long-term unemployed. Industrial disputes are down, in spite of what they said, and wages are up. Wages up, inflation moderating. That is what is occurring. That is what is occurring. And those opposite, of course, in that last budget that they handed down, the number of saves is a really round figure of 0. They provided no saves whatsoever. They just splashed money, as they did with waste when they were in government. Remember the $20 billion in JobKeeper payments that went to companies that were increasing their profits. They weren't going down, they were going up. They were going up. Remember the $5.5 billion on the French subcontract without delivering a single vessel and destroying our relationship with our ally there. Remember blowing out the cost of the inferior copper NBN by $29 billion. Then there's the Inland Rail project. They said they were going to build it and finish it for $4.7 billion. The cost of $31 billion without going anywhere. They spent $5 billion on contractors and consultants. We're getting on the job,
Order.
with the job
Prime Minister's
of
time
good,
has
responsible...
concluded. Call to the honourable member for Moreton.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to ease cost of living pressures on students and to make the education system fairer after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend the magnificent member for Moreton for his question. Mr Speaker, the big hike in HECS indexation last year hit a lot of Australians hard, in particular a lot of young Australians. They made their voice heard, and we've heard it. The budget tonight will wipe about $3 billion of HECS debt for more than 3 million Australians. As members know, I asked the university's Accord team to look at this issue, and they recommended that we set indexation at either inflation or wages, whatever is the lowest. We're doing that, and we're going further than that. We're going to backdate this to last year. In other words, we're going to wipe out what happened last year and make sure it never happens again. For someone with an average HECS debt of about $26,000, it means their HECS debt will be cut by about $1,200. For someone with a HECS debt of $45,000, it'll mean their HECS debt is cut by about $2,000. It's an important reform to make HECS fairer. And, Mr Speaker, in the budget tonight, for the first time ever, the Commonwealth Government will provide financial support to teaching and nursing and social work students to help them while they're doing their prac. These are people who have signed up to do some of the most important jobs in this country. People who are going to help educate our kids, look after us when we're sick or when we're old, support women in domestic violence refuges. And a big part of becoming a teacher or a nurse or a social worker is practical training. They sometimes have to give up their part-time job to do it. So this is a bit of practical help for people while they're doing their practical training. To tell you what it means, I got an email from a nursing student from the member for Bendigo's electorate last week. It said this: "I just saw your announcement about paid placement for nurses and I'm crying. You've given me faith that the Labor government really cares about the growth of the whole community. I cannot even explain how much this announcement has benefited me mentally, let alone financially. Thank you for listening to the community." Mr Speaker, making HECS fairer and paid prac are just two parts of our response to the Universities Accord. They help with the cost of degrees and they help with the cost of living. But we've also got to do something about the cost of a lot of young people missing out on the chance to go to university altogether, in particular young people from our outer suburbs and from regional Australia. And you'll see what we do there tonight. 10 years ago, the Liberals cut the guts out of education in their 2014 budget. We're building a better and a fairer education system, and you'll see that in the budget tonight.
The Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Families are feeling the impact of Labor's homegrown inflation, with the cost of almost everything going up. Food is up 10%, housing is up 12%, insurance is up 26%, electricity and gas are up 18% and 25% respectively. Why are Australians paying the price for the weak economic leadership of this Prime Minister?
Order. Members on my right and left will cease interjecting. There's far too much noise. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I'm asked about where we are under this government 2 years in, which we will commemorate next week. And 2 years in, when we inherited through energy,
members on my left,
energy wholesale electricity prices in the June quarter of 2022 were $264.
Members on my left will cease interjecting.
In the December quarter last year, they were $76. Gas prices, $31.76 in May 2022. In the December quarter of 2023, that was down to $11.60. And of course, we will, get to 2 years with the same Prime Minister. When they were elected, Tony Abbott didn't make it to 2 years. They brought in the 2014 budget that ripped the guts out of education and health, led by the bloke who's now the Leader of the Opposition, with $50 billion of cuts in health, with a GP tax on every time someone would go and visit a doctor, with a tax every time someone would visit an emergency department.
The Prime Minister will pause. The Minister for Skills will cease interjecting so I can hear the Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, the question is about costs today going up. Food up 10%, housing up 12%, insurance up 26%, not some kind of history lesson.
The Leader of the House on the point of order.
I think in saying it's about costs. The Manager Opposition Business has just explained why this answer is in order.
Look, the question in anyone's interpretation was very broad, because the question was actually about the price of economic leadership of the last 2 years. And there was a whole range of issues in the question. So I think on anyone's definitions it's a pretty broad question, and the Prime Minister now has been specific with his answer regarding the issues raised. So I think everyone can agree it's very relevant. So the Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. They're embarrassed by their budget of 10 years ago when we saw the coalition unplugged. But we know that the inflation figure that we inherited, 2.1% in just a quarter, and today annual inflation's at 3.6%. Wages, of course, the biggest drop outside of the pandemic in real wages this century occurred in the March quarter 2022, again down 1.4%. Ours, real wages rising for 3 consecutive quarters. Sluggish labour market under them, under us. Employment growth has doubled, 780,000 new jobs created. Productivity under them, the worst in 40 years, under us, up in the last 3 quarters. Business investment declined under them to the lowest levels since the early 2000s. Under us, business investment has grown in every quarter under Labor, up 13% in real terms. But of course, budget policy will be there for all to see tonight, something that would be familiar to them. They produced mugs saying that there was a surplus, but that's all it was. They treated Australians like mugs.
Order.
They never produced a surplus in almost a decade in office. Tonight, we will see the second surplus in a row, with a $9.3 billion projected surplus, following on from last year's $22 billion, which is better than the $78 billion deficit that we inherited under them.
Order. Before I call the member for Pearce, the member for Kooyong has brought to my attention that Richard Nixon from her electorate is also here, and he contributed to the building of Parliament House today. Welcome to all the people who built Parliament House. Order. Give the call to the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government investing in greater capability for the Australian Defence Force to keep Australians safe? And how does this compare to other approaches? Thank you.
The call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight's budget contains an increase in defence spending of $5.7 billion, which on its own terms is the single largest increase in defence spending over a 4-year cycle in decades. It far outstrips any increases that we saw over the lost decade when those opposite were in power. And, Mr. Speaker, this is an inconvenient truth which sticks in their craw, because from their perspective this is just not how it's meant to be. And this forms part of a $12.1 billion increase over 10 years, which is also in the budget. And when you combine that with the decisions that were taken in last year's budget, over the next decade, we will see an additional $50 billion spent on defence relative to what we inherited when we came to power. Now, Mr. Speaker, those opposite have refused to commit to that increase. The Shadow Minister, in his desperation, is literally saying anything, but as recently as Sunday, the Shadow Treasurer could not have been clearer that the Liberals are refusing to commit to this increase. And all the while, the Shadow Minister, Senator Patterson, is left to be the one who is out there making speeches about Liberal defence policy. They are a mess, and they're falling back on their pathetic, tired whimpers that they'll always be the party which spends more on defence, just as they are always the party of lower taxation but everyone in this chamber knows that it is precisely the opposite which is the case. Because when they last presided over the Treasury benches, they ran a government which grossly underfunded defence. Whether we are talking about guided weapons, increases in Defence Force personnel or more ships, every one of those announcements that they made was underfunded by billions and billions of dollars. Mr Speaker, the truth of the matter is that it is the Albanese Labor government which is delivering a tax cut to every working Australian. It is the Albanese Labor government which has delivered 2 budget surpluses in a row. And it is the Albanese Labor government which is delivering historic increases in defence spending. The Liberals were big on defence marketing and defence politics, but it is the Albanese Labor government which is committed to doing what it takes to keep Australians safe.
Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, given Labor's rationale for banning live sheep exports is based on animal welfare, can the Prime Minister name one country that has higher animal welfare standards for live exports than Australia?
Give the call to order. Members on my left, the member for Riverina will cease interjecting. The members on my left, the time to interject is not before a minister or Prime Minister speaks. Trust me. The Prime Minister has the call.
For his question. I thank him for his engagement up there at Beef Week in Rocky last week. Of course, he could have a chat to the person just sitting next to him, I reckon, to get an answer for this. Because in 2018, the member for Farrer introduced a private member's bill to ban the live export of sheep. Live Sheep Export Prohibition Bill 2018. Now, if he doesn't want to trust the member for Farrer, he could wander down to the member for Latrobe. Because good old Jace down there, he was on board. Not a lot of sheep in Latrobe.
No. The Prime Minister will pause. The Prime Minister will refer to members by their correct titles. The order, members on my right will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the Leader of the Nationals on a point of order.
Order on relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was very tight. It asked the Prime Minister to name one country that has higher animal welfare standards than Australia.
Yep. On the point of order, the Leader of the House.
Speaker, the first part of the question referred to the rationale for the policy, and the Prime Minister it's completely in order to talk about those on the opposition benches who have called for that rationale and have called for that ban.
Order. The Speaker cannot direct the form that an answer must have. Standing orders do not provide for that. I understand the Leader of the Nationals would like a specific answer. In this case, a country. Sometimes it's a yes-no answer. I understand that. Yep, I understand that. Under the standing orders, which he knows and every single member is aware of, which I have explained to many members that they could be changed if they wish, and the process of doing that, no one's taken me up on that offer. On either side of the parliament. So the standing orders at the moment are that the Prime Minister's got to be directly relevant. If he was talking about another topic, I'm going to allow him to give some context at the beginning. He's had less than 1 minute into the question. He can't make his answer all about the opposition or what they have done, but I'm going to allow him now to return to the question.
Speaker, but I couldn't put it better than saying ending live sheep export can be a win for both animal welfare and business. That was the title of the member for Farrer's opinion piece back there arguing the case. Because one of the things that the member knows in asking this question is that, to quote another person, Senator Henderson, you could have all this discussion at Shadow Cabinet, it appears. If any person in Australia crams sheep into a transport vehicle for 25 days, that's 25 days. 25 days in the searing heat. In the searing heat, with limited access to food and water, standing in their own excrement, that person will be charged with animal cruelty. He's very angry at his fellow Shadow Cabinet members Mr. Speaker. The fact is that what we have done, we went to an election and committed to this. We went to another election and committed to this and were elected. We then had a review with appropriate recommendations. We have provided over $100 million for transition to support the industry, to support the changes that will be required, with a clear transition with time over the next 4 years.
The Leader of the Nationals will cease interjecting.
Over the next 4 years in which to transition.
Order. The member for Page. The member for Werriwa now has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering infrastructure for every Australian while cleaning up the mess of the Liberals and Nationals?
The call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Can I thank very much the member for Werriwa for the question, and thank her also for her tireless advocacy for the people, particularly of Western Sydney, making sure that they get the infrastructure that they need to ensure that the jobs and livability of Western Sydney is at the forefront of this government's thinking. Well, of course, tonight the Treasurer will deliver a budget for every Australian, including when it comes to infrastructure investment, as well as investment in training for our construction workers and retaining our important apprentices in construction. Tonight's budget delivers on the hard work we've undertaken since coming to office to clean up the mess of the decade of what the opposite left us when it came to the infrastructure investment pipeline. A Liberal and National legacy of billions and billions of dollars of underfunded projects and an infrastructure pipeline that would have seen no new infrastructure projects announced in any of your seats, any of our seats, any of the states and territories for at least a decade. That is the legacy left by those opposite when it came to the infrastructure investment pipeline, very similar to that left in the infrastructure investment pipeline in defence. I've been working hard with my state and territory colleagues to identify the priorities for this budget. For many states, that priority has been making sure that we are providing additional funding to actually deliver projects that are in the pipeline. That's why in Victoria I was proud to announce we're investing a further $3.25 billion for the North East Link, bringing our contribution up to $5 billion, a project that takes 15,000 trucks a day off suburban roads. I stood there with the Prime Minister. It's a terrific project. We've also focused on some of the biggest growth areas. Last week, when we were in Western Sydney, we announced our package of $1.9 billion to cement Western Sydney's future as an economic powerhouse and a place for opportunity. The budget invests $1.9 billion, something the member for Lindsay could only ever dream of, couldn't actually deliver, towards 14 new projects, and provides additional funding towards 2 existing projects that will help underpin significant jobs and growth in Sydney's west. Where the Liberals and Nationals frankly left this important region behind, we are delivering the money that is required to actually deliver on these road projects, not just press releases. And of course, yesterday I was in the Sunshine Coast to announce a further $1.5 billion for Stage 1 of Direct Sunshine Coast Rail to Caloundra, an important project not just for the Olympics but also for transport for the South East, something that was woefully underfunded by those opposite. Woefully underfunded. You can't build a rail track on a press release. We're delivering infrastructure those opposites could only dream of.
Before I call the honourable member for Indi, I'd also like to welcome Jess Stoyevski, MP, a member of the Western Australian Parliament and Parliament Secretary to the Premier. Welcome to question time. Give the call to the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. When the budget is handed down by the Treasurer this evening, it will include a budget line labelled "Decisions taken but not yet announced." Billions of dollars to be spent, but we won't know where or on what. As we approach the next election, can you guarantee that your government will not pork-barrel these funds to win votes in marginal seats?
Order. Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. In spite of the representations I'll receive from those in that corner, I can and have done in the lead-up to this evening, and I'll outline them all one by one if you like, Member for Indi. What we will do is make sure that our investments are ones that build nation building. If you look at the work that the Minister for Infrastructure, for example, has done, as to put integrity back in the system. That's why she did the review. That's why we're out there making positive, constructive, nation-building announcements on things that actually matter. The member refers to decisions taken but not announced. Some of those are, of course, for national security reasons. There's a reason why that's included, and there are often very good reasons why that is the case. And that should always remain the case. But my government is committed to transparency. We're committed to making sure that taxpayers' dollars are spent wisely, which is why so many of the reforms that we've done as well are universal. They're not for some people in some seats. They are absolutely universal. And an example of that is the doubling of Roads to Recovery. Roads to Recovery in particular helps councils which are in larger seats, so tends to help people in regional seats more so than urban communities. It's good policy, it makes a difference for local government, and it makes a difference for road safety, and it's just one example of us getting the decision-making processes right.
Give a call to the honourable member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How are the Albanese Labor government's investments to strengthen Medicare improving GP bulk billing rates after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Give a call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Yeah, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Bendigo for her question. It's a timely question to ask about the decade of cuts and neglects, because yesterday was the 10th anniversary of the famous 2014 budget. I'm sure all of those opposite were out there celebrating, remembering, of course, that once the thick plumes of smoke from Joe Hockey and Matthias Cormann's famous budget cigars had finally cleared the air around Parliament House, the scale of the cuts to basic government services became clear to every Australian. And at its heart, Mr Speaker, was the worst health budget in Australian history, delivered by the worst health minister in the Medicare era. That same health minister had said, and I quote, "There were too many free Medicare services, Mr Speaker," and so he tried to abolish bulk billing altogether, tried to make every single Australian pay a fee every single time they visited the doctor. He tried to slash hospital funding by $50 billion out of our public hospitals and to jack up the price of medicines by up to $5 a script, Mr Speaker. Well, our approach to health budgets could not be more different, Mr Speaker, could not be more different. Our budgets have made medicines cheaper, not dearer, but cheaper, saving Australians hundreds of millions of dollars already. We're going to put more funding into our crucial public hospitals, not less, not $50 billion less, like the Leader of the Opposition would have done. And, Mr Speaker, for Labor, bulk billing is the beating heart of Medicare, the beating heart. And that's why the centrepiece of last year's budget was a $3.5 billion investment to triple the bulk billing incentive for GP visits. And in just the first 5 months, Mr Speaker, that has delivered more than 950,000 additional free visits to the doctor. And in the member for Bendigo's electorate, the bulk billing rate for GP visits has climbed by almost 8%. 8% in just 5 months, delivering 25,600 additional free visits to the doctor, Mr Speaker, one of the best results in the country and a reflection of the hard work by the member for Bendigo in trumpeting the benefits of our strengthening Medicare agenda in her electorate, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we promised the Australian people that we would strengthen Medicare and we would make medicines cheaper, and we are doing that. In 2013, those opposite promised there would be no cuts to health, and the Leader of the Opposition delivered the exact opposite.
Call to the honourable member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister.
will the Prime Minister rule out any changes to or any limitations on live cattle exports from Australia?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. The only people who've argued to stop and pause the live cattle trade in recent times are those opposite. Are those opposite? When foot and mouth disease was an issue in Indonesia, those opposite, including the Leader of the Opposition, called upon the trade to be stopped. And Murray Watt kept it open. So I suggest,
Members on my left.
just like on live sheep, they should have a discussion in their shadow cabinet on this.
Order. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Leader of the Opposition is entitled to raise a point of order, and he'll be heard in silence. The Leader of the Opposition has the
Thank
call.
you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, it's on relevance. The question couldn't have been more direct. Can we just get one straight answer from this Prime Minister?
Resume your seat. I know we're the Leader of the House. I can read his mind at this moment, but I'll see if I'm wrong. Here's the call.
Mr Speaker, the comment at the end was not simply an abuse of the standing orders, but also happening only minutes after you had given warning that that should not happen again.
Yeah. We're going to have serious consequences if every time someone gets up, raises a point of order, which they're entitled to do under the standing orders, to stop the flow, to stop the answer, to stop the argument, which they're entitled to do, which is disrupting the parliament, to make a legitimate point of order. It is simply not acceptable to then add a remark, add a snide comment at the end. So this is the first day back, and it's not going to happen anymore. So you raise the point of order, you state specifically what it is without additional remarks or additional comments. Hope everyone's clear on that. On the point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I appreciate your guidance. I would add, though, that the conduct of the House would be assisted if the Prime Minister was able to approach his answer to the questions in a genuine way. The question was, Mr Speaker, very simple. It was put succinctly. It's without ambiguity, and the Prime Minister creates a dynamic in this parliament which is against the spirit that you're trying to enforce through his obfuscation and his complete refusal to answer the questions as you direct, Mr Speaker.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his support of me. So, order. On my right, on my left, the Prime Minister was asked about ruling out changing limitations on live cattle exports. I'm just going to make sure, for the remainder of his answer, he's being relevant and make sure he's respecting the standing orders, as everyone else is. Here's the call.
Much, Mr Speaker. Well, just as the 2014 budget showed the ideological character of the coalition, every time this bloke gets to this dispatch box, it shows his personal character. It shows his personal character, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister will return to the question.
Because we have made it very clear, when it comes to the live cattle export trade, that is a trade that we support. That is a trade that we have gone out of our way to support, including personal contact between myself and President Widodo and the work that we did with Indonesia to provide significant support to make sure that trade could continue at a time when those opposite were calling for it to be paused. Those opposite were calling for that trade to be paused. That's what members of the Liberal Party were doing at that time. We think this is an important trade. It's important to have a big distinction between it and live sheep. When it comes to live sheep, I table the document, which is obviously still on the member for Farrer's website. Ending live sheep export can be a win for both animal welfare and business. It actually is pretty good. It outlines exactly why we have taken the decision that we have, and that was something that was supported by senior front benches across the board there. When it comes to the live cattle export industry, which goes on far shorter distances, which has put in place significant reforms to make sure animal welfare is looked after. That is why we support this industry and will continue to do so. I suggest those opposite should back it in next time too, instead of at the first opportunity, as they do with every single issue, whether it's national security or anything else, always looking for product differentiation, as they did when that issue came up in Indonesia.
Call to the honourable member for Robertson.
Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How will the Albanese Labor government's Homes for Australia plan turbocharge home building, and what could be standing in its way?
Give a call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank our wonderful member for Robertson. The member for Robertson understands the housing challenges in his electorate and indeed around the country. He also knows that after a wasted decade of those opposite, we haven't got enough homes in Australia and we haven't had enough homes for quite some time. Indeed, we need to build more homes, Mr Speaker, more quickly in more parts of the country. And that's why we have an ambitious national target to build 1.2 million homes by the end of the decade from 1 July through our Homes for Australia plan. We want to slash the red tape, Mr Speaker. We want to train more tradies. We want to ensure that more Australians have a safe, affordable place to call home. And that's why we're backing Homes for Australia with tens of billions of dollars. Indeed, $32 billion in new housing initiatives since we've come to office. They include a new $9.3 billion five-year agreement with the states and territories to help combat homelessness, provide crisis support and to build and repair social housing. This includes, importantly, Mr Speaker, a doubling of Commonwealth homelessness funding every year to be matched by the states and territories. Homes for Australia also includes $1 billion in new funding for the states and territories for additional social housing supply and, importantly, for infrastructure needed to deliver more homes more quickly, Mr Speaker. And we're targeting another $1 billion, of course, in crisis and transitional accommodation for women and children fleeing family violence and young people. This new funding comes on top of the announcement in the middle of last week with the Minister for Skills and I, the $90 million that we announced to train more tradies. We need to boost the number of tradies in this country. We need more tradies to build more homes for Australia. This, of course, is part of our plan that includes our Housing Australia Future Fund, our National Housing Accord, our Social Housing Accelerator, our New Homes Bonus and the Housing Support Program, all designed and targeted so that we can meet at the ambitious target of 1.2 million homes right across Australia through our Homes for Australia plan. And I say to those opposite, Mr Speaker, what is their plan? How many homes do they intend to build and how are they going to fund it, Mr Speaker? Because that's the question. Saying no is not the answer. Saying no to the Housing Australia Future Fund, saying no to Help to Buy is not the answer when so many Australians need support. Those opposite wasted a decade when they were in government. They made the housing situation worse. Mr Speaker, they can keep saying no to more housing. We're going to get on with the job. We're going to keep building more homes for Australians that need them, and we're going to train the tradies to build the homes.
Give the call to the honourable member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. Today, David McBride was sentenced to 5 years and 8 months in prison for the crime, to the Prime Minister, sorry. I'll start again. Today, David McBride was sentenced to 5 years and 8 months in prison for the crime of telling the truth about war crimes. Why won't your government admit that our whistleblower laws are broken and commit to urgent reform to keep whistleblowers like Mr McBride out of jail? Thank you.
It was directed to the Prime Minister, confirming that the member for Ryan has asked her question. The Prime Minister has the call.
Yes, Mr Speaker. This matter, as the member has indicated, was finalised in the courts today. In the report, it also indicated that there would be an appeal to that before the courts. I'm not going to say anything here that interferes with a matter that is quite clearly going to continue to be before the courts, because to do so, we know what the consequences of that are.
Give the call to the member for Bean.
Speaker,
my question is to the Minister for Government Services. How will the Albanese Labor government's budget help to ensure the safety of people who work at Services Australia, as well as the safety of Australians who rely on those services?
Give a call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
Members in the House may recall that it was on May the 23rd last year at Airport West. Joanne Casa was a team leader and she filled in for the one security guard at Airport West at lunchtime. She was stabbed by someone coming into the Centrelink office that day. I visited the staff the next day and I've caught up with her and her family by that Friday. Unfortunately, violence against our public servants is not as uncommon as it should be. Last financial year, there were 9,000 assaults, acts of aggression. In the first 6 months of this year, 6,852 of them serious. There are 10 million Australian visits to Centrelink offices and Medicare offices. There are 6,000 people who work there, and governments have an obligation to keep both the users of the system and the workers safe. On the next day after the attack on Joanne Casa, I asked Graham Ashton, a former top cop in Victoria, to cast a policeman's eye over how we can improve the safety in the system. He gave me recommendations within 3 months. At MOFO last year, we announced a down payment of $46 million to keep people safe. I'm pleased to advise that in tonight's budget there will be $314 million extra over the next 2 years. This will lead to 606 extra security guards. There will be improved features of security at the offices that Australians visit. There will be improved liaison capacity with local police if an incident does occur. We'll be establishing for the first time a centralised security operations centre with better CCTV and real-time monitoring of the 318 offices. We're also overhauling 35 of the busiest centres to improve the safety features of those which have the highest traffic. I should say, in talking about keeping people who use our social security and Medicare system safe, that it is only a very small cohort of people from whom the most significant acts of aggression are drawn. These are people who frequently, as we've seen in other situations in Australia, grappling with mental health and other matters. But we need to keep people safe. People have got a right to go to work and come home safely. In addition, we're backing up tonight's announcement through the work with the Attorney-General and myself to increase the penalties. At the moment, if you assault a judge, you receive some higher maximum penalties than if you assault a frontline public servant. I'm pleased to say with the legislation that we have in the House that if you attack a public servant, an ATO staff member or indeed an electorate staff member, there will not be a second-class set of penalties for these people. All people who work for the Commonwealth from the front line will be treated as equally important. This is part of our ongoing system to keep Australians safe.
Give the call to the honourable member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Before the election, the Prime Minister promised that the Coalition's Operation Sovereign Borders would remain unchanged. Given there have been 3 illegal boat arrivals in the last week, has the Prime Minister lost control of our borders? How many people have drowned at sea since Labor took office, and how many women and children are in immigration detention under this government?
Order. Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. I can do no more than quote Rear Admiral Brett Sonta, who made it very clear in February when he said this: "The mission of Operation Sovereign Borders remains the same today as it was when it was established in 2013. Protect Australia's borders, combat people smuggling in our region and, importantly, prevent people from risking their lives at sea." He went on, of course, he's gone on to make it very clear, as has the ABF Commissioner, Michael Outram, about funding, with regard to rebuking the opposition for some of their false claims when they've said this: "Border Force funding is currently the highest it's been since its establishment in 2015, and in the last year the ABF has received additional funding totalling hundreds of millions of dollars to support maritime and land-based operations."
Give a call to the honourable member for Newcastle.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Minister, why is investing in renewables important, And why is the government rejecting proposed plans for risky nuclear power stations in Australia?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much.
Order.
Mr Speaker, I thank the terrific member for Newcastle for a question. And just a couple of weeks ago, she and I, with the member for Patterson, had a great meeting with 600 Novocastrians calling for more renewable energy in the Hunter Valley. Now, Mr Speaker, we do reject plans for nuclear power stations in Australia because they're too slow, too expensive and too risky, Mr Speaker. We know they're too expensive because they're the most expensive form of power, as study after study has shown. We know they're too risky for Australia because it would put more pressure on ageing coal-fired power stations, which are ageing and less reliable as they break down more and more often, and that is risky for our power system. And we know they are too slow to build. They take decades to build, and almost every nuclear power plant under construction anywhere in the world over recent decades has experienced very significant blowouts in time as well as cost. And sometimes, Mr Speaker, nuclear power plans can blow out before they're even announced. In terms of timing, Mr Speaker, not just construction, but the announcement. The Leader of the Opposition was in Jamison Town on the 21st of March when he was asked when the Opposition would announce their detailed plans for nuclear, and he said, "We'll have more to say about the exact locations over the next couple of weeks." And he went on to say, "We'll provide you with that detail over the next couple of weeks." Now, a couple can be, it generally means two, but we would give a bit of leeway. That was 9 weeks ago, Mr Speaker, 9 weeks ago. The Leader of the National Party weighed in. He made it very clear, made a very tough statement, the Leader of the National Party. He said, "We are not going to be bullied into putting this out on any timeline, Mr Speaker." They're not going to be bullied into a timeline they announced, Mr Speaker. That's what he said. But the Shadow Minister cleared it up. He said, "People have got to know you're not trying to cover things up. You've just got to be really open." Well, I'm very glad to hear that, Mr Speaker. They haven't announced their policy. They briefed the Australian newspaper 16 times that their nuclear plan would be announced before the budget. Now, we've got 3.5 hours to go, Mr Speaker. I'll be waiting, watching the television for the alerts to come out from the Leader of the Opposition as they announce the plan. But they should announce it. If they don't announce it today, they should announce the detailed plan. They have another opportunity on Thursday night, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition has big chance before the Australian people. Detailed plans with costings, Mr Speaker, with locations, with details, with full modelled and costed policies, and tell the electorates and the communities in Australia where these nuclear power plants will be. Thursday is the chance for the Leader of the Opposition to do what he hasn't done in any other budget reply, or, to be fair, any other speech or any other press conference or any other interview, and actually announce a detailed policy.
Give a call to the member for Flinders.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Treasurer claimed inflation will be fixed by Christmas, despite the RBA having forecast that it will be higher for longer. How does the Prime Minister explain the difference between the Treasurer's forecasts and the views of the Reserve Bank and reputable economists like Chris Richardson or Warren Hogan?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, the quote was made up, Mr Speaker. The quote was made up. But there are two issues here. One is, of course, the budget tonight. The budget tonight, in terms of the RBA forecast, were before the budget. The budget tonight will indicate Treasury forecasts on inflation based upon the policies that we've put in place. And one of the things that I've made very clear, Mr Speaker, is that when the Expenditure Review Committee has sat down, unlike what they did in the lead-up to the 2022 budget of former Treasurer Frydenberg, where they just splashed money everywhere, unlike the declarations about Back in Black, where a bunch of mugs held some mugs, but that was all that happened. What we have done is to make sure that we've put in place the strong measures to actually produce a budget surplus last year of $22 billion confirmed, and a projected budget this year, surplus this year, of $9.3 billion. That is what we have done. And one of the other things we have done is to make sure that when we've considered cost of living relief, We've done it in a way that provides support to people. That's why every single taxpayer will get a tax cut, not just some. That's why we've made sure that the measures that you'll see in tonight's budget are shaped in a way that they are not done to put pressure on inflation, just as previous measures, all of them opposed by those opposite, like our energy price relief plan, has been found to have put downward pressure on inflation, just like our cheaper childcare plan has put downward pressure on inflation, just like our fee-free TAFE has put downward pressure on inflation. They are some of the reasons why inflation today is half of what we inherited. But the test for the Leader of the Opposition is on Thursday night to produce an alternative budget with costings, with policies, with a time frame. We're saying not just where the expenditure is going to occur, but how they're going to pay for it, because they've made a whole lot of comments, including restoring some tax cuts for very high income earners back to their old levels. They said they would reverse the measures that we put in place. The Leader of the Opposition said we should go to an election on it. So Thursday night is his chance to get out of the policy-free zone that he's been in and announce fully costed policies.
Call to the honourable member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. How is Australia building on our history with Papua New Guinea, and how did the Prime Minister's recent visit there serve to deepen our relationship?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Solomon for his question and for his service, his distinguished service. As an Australian, there are very few experiences that can be more humbling than to walk a part of the Kokoda Track. To be in the same place that Australians and Papua New Guineans fought desperately for the same thing at the time, which was home. Last month, in the lead-up to Anzac Day, I had the privilege of walking in the footsteps of giants. I was joined by the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, James Marape, who became the first PNG Prime Minister to walk part of the Kokoda Track. I was joined by the Governor of Oro Province, Gary Juffa. We started at Kokoda itself and we received welcomes at all of the villages that was just as warm as those people familiar with PNG would expect. This friendship between our two nations is about more than geographic proximity. It was cemented literally on the Kokoda Track all those decades ago, a friendship nurtured across generations. Throughout our journey, that was a relatively short one, I had the pleasure of meeting many Australians walking the Kokoda Track for the entire journey in what has become a pilgrimage in memory and in respect for those Australians who fought for our country. The landscape is beautiful, but it is challenging, as every member who's walked there knows so well. But at every step you reflect on those who are up against something unimaginably harder. In 1942, 625 Australians were killed along the track, the great artery of mud and suffering and perseverance that holds such a special place of such power in Australia's shared memory and indeed the memory of PNG. So many Papua New Guineans helped Australians, troops, coast watchers, shipping pilots, nurses and carers, villagers and stretcher bearers. Angels, as they became known, walking tall through the hell of war. All this was certainly on my mind when we reached Issarava, the scene of the battle that claimed 99 Australian lives and wounded another 111. It was a solemn privilege to be there on Anzac Day to utter those important words, lest we forget. I want to acknowledge the ADF personnel and AFP and others who supported the trip. I want to acknowledge the porters who made the expedition possible, especially Bella. Couldn't have done it without him, that's for sure. PNG is our nearest of neighbours. It is an important relationship. We are the closest of friends, and spending that time with Prime Minister Marape was a part of demonstrating what a crucial element that relationship is in peace and stability in our region. And on that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Order.